So here is Kyle. Kyle has an extensive background working with endangered species, threatened ecosystems, stakeholder engagement, watershed restoration projects on private and public lands. He received his Master in Science in Natural Resources from the University of Vermont, where he focused on forest ecology and worked on monitoring, restoration, and forestry projects with the U.S. Forestry Department and the National Park Services, several local government agencies around the country. Since moving to the South Coast 6 years ago, Kyle has worked with local nonprofits groups to successfully implement habitat restoration, focused on coho salmon and dolphins. In his spare time, Kyle likes to surf, bike, travel, and read. And in 2020, he did a 2.5-month bike ride from Oregon to Virginia, cycling across the continent for 4,300 miles. If I don't pronounce it correctly, please do correct me. Kyle is the Coastal Community Coordinator for the Elakha Alliance. Okay. I looked at that so many times and came up with so many pronunciations, but Elakha Alliance. So without further ado, Kyle Motley.
My name is Kyle. I'm the Coastal Community Coordinator for the Elakha Alliance, and I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about sea otters, their history, and the work we are doing at the Elakha Alliance to try and reintroduce the population to the Oregon coast. I'll touch a little bit on these topics. I'll talk a little about sea otter life history, the population status, both past and current, the efforts and considerations that go into reintroducing a population here in our state, and then a little bit about my group, the Elakha Alliance, and then we'll have time for questions and discussions. But first, I want to say, Happy Valentine's Day. Great way to spend Valentine's Day than talking about sea otters. We can all just be little sea otters here holding each other's hands. Thank you for spending Valentine's Day with me and talking about sea otters. I appreciate it. So, without further ado, this cute guy right here is a sea otter. Sea otters are part of the mustelid family. Mustelids are a family of carnivorous animals that include weasels, skunks, wolverines, and badgers. And there are 3 subspecies of sea otter. There's a northern subspecies, a southern subspecies, and an Asian subspecies. And they live in the coastal waters of the Pacific Ocean, usually within a half-mile from shore. They tend to be found in areas that include rocky shorelines and reefs, and are also known for utilizing kelp for forage and for cover. They're very social animals. They aggregate in groups called rafts. So if you see a group of sea otters, it's a raft of sea otters. A pack of wolves, a murder of crows. My favorite one I want to mention is a squadron of pelicans. Love that one. But it is a raft of sea otters. And like I said, sea otters live in the Pacific Ocean. Who here has been in the Pacific Ocean? Right? I'm a surfer. You're a surfer. It's cold, right? But sea otters spend their entire lives in the water, but they're the only marine mammal that does not use blubber or a wetsuit to stay warm in the ocean. Instead, they have the densest fur of any animal in the world. That everybody gives me that little OK sign. That's like a square inch. A sea otter's pelt has 1 million hairs in 1 square inch. And I have one here that I'm going to ask my beautiful assistant to pass around so people can touch it. You get an idea also of how big they are, right? This is a small young male from Washington. The old pelt I had was almost as tall as I was. But even this is a pretty big one. And this is, so you guys know that I'm legit, is my U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service permit for carrying the pelt of a marine mammal. So if you guys want to touch it, you can feel how soft they are. You're supposed to use the back of your hand so the oils don't foul any of the fur, but this thing has gone into 3rd grade classrooms and got don't worry about it. You'll get an idea of how just how much that fur helps keep them warm in the Pacific Ocean. The other way that they stay warm besides its pellets is they have a very high metabolism. They eat about 30% of their body weight every day. It's equivalent to me eating about 55 pounds of food every day. So that high metabolism with that dense fur, that keeps them warm without blubber in the ocean. I mean, in order to feed so much, they're very efficient divers and foragers, often feeding on urchins, crabs, clams, and other shellfish. They can dive pretty deep, up to about 250 feet. It's very taxing on the animal. You can imagine how much energy you're spending to get that deep. Most sea otter dives are done under 60 feet. It's very easy to see what they're eating because they carry all of their food to the surface. One of my favorite facts, they're one of the few animals to use tools like monkeys, us. Recently, they're talking about cows now. Are going to use tools. I didn't look too much into that. But sea otters use tools. They have favorite rocks that they'll put on their belly, smash open clams and other shellfish like the one up there on the right. They also have I was on a sea otter population survey in Elkhorn Slough in California, and this just shows how smart they are. There was a nail hanging off of the dock, and I saw a sea otter grab a clam and use that nail as a pry bar and open it up against that. So when it comes to food, very smart. They also have extremely strong jaws and fracture-resistant teeth that helps them kind of chew and digest things that are covered with a protective shell. I love this picture. This is a great Valentine's Day picture right here, right? Good one. They're a very slow breeding species. They only have one pup at a time. Pups are dependent on the moms up to a year. They nurse for about 6 months and then are taught how to forage for themselves over the next 6 months. Moms are often seen holding their pups and cleaning them to keep their fur clean so they can stay warm. Sea otter pups are so buoyant that they can't go underwater. I was up in Alaska on a sea otter survey, and you would watch moms leave their pups bobbing on the top as they dove down for food and came back up. They also are known to wrap themselves and their pups in kelp during high wind events and storms to keep them from drifting. And again, sea otters can get pretty big. They get about the size of a full-grown German Shepherd. By contrast, harbor seals, which we have a lot of here, can be up to about 350 pounds. And that is mostly the blubber they are using to stay warm in the ocean. And sea otters are about 3 times larger than river otters, which is important because we have river otters here in Oregon. We don't have sea otters. It's very common for people to mistake the two because river otters will go on the beach. They'll go on to sea stacks. They'll go into the ocean foraging for fish. So I include this slide here. Look at the differences. So again, sea otters are a lot bigger. Sea otters are very buoyant and they swim on their backs, where river otters are belly swimmers and not as buoyant. They ride low in the water. Sea otters have these rear flippers that they use to swim, whereas river otters have paws that all look like this. When I go into like classrooms, kids love to do this. Give me a sea otter high five. Good down. Have a more. Yeah, kids love that. Actually, sometimes I do like 2 or 3 times around the room. The other distinguishing factor is that sea otters, again, only have 1 pup at a time. River otters have multiple pups. I just include this because we get calls all the time about people seeing sea otters in Oregon. And 99% of the time, it is a river otter who is just in the same. And once there were sea otters here in Oregon. Sea otters used to range across the entire North Pacific from Baja, California, up the coast of what is now the US, into British Columbia, Alaska, across the Bering Strait into Russia and into Japan. There was about 200,000 animals worldwide. We don't really know how many were here in Oregon, but the best guesses we can get from some of the archaeological evidence is probably around 4,000 across the state. How do we know that sea otters are here in Oregon? Sea otters were here in Oregon if we don't have them now. One way is that every coastal indigenous language has its own word for sea otter. We take our word, our name, the Elakha Alliance, from the Chinook word Elakha, which means sea otter in that language. I have really tried my best to learn how to pronounce some of these other ones, and I just butcher them repeatedly, so I'm not going to do that. But yes, every coastal indigenous language has its own word for sea otters. There's also a lot of stories passed down from tribes about the special role that sea otters and their pelts held in their societies. They were precious items conferring wealth and status to the wearer. There's a lot of narratives about protagonists and stories winning otter prizes. And there's a lot of stories about how sea otters were viewed as respected kin and linked tribal people to the natural abundance of the ocean and nearshore environment. We also know they were here from the accounts of early white settlers. The first American ship in the Columbia, captained by Robert Gray, sent back numerous reports about beaver skins and otter pelts. There's this really interesting article published in the Harper's Bazaar in 1855, which tells of the author going on a sea otter hunting expedition in Coos Bay. Lastly, we still have current geographic features on the coast named after sea otters that have been passed down from indigenous languages. We have Otter Rock up in Lincoln County, and then Otter Point down in Curry. So I think from that evidence, we can conclude that sea otters were here in Oregon. How do we have any idea of their abundance? The only evidence we have is from archaeological. Sea otter bones are the second most numerous marine mammal bones found at shell-midden sites across the coast. This tells us how important sea otters were. And from some of that DNA evidence, we've been able to kind of estimate that there were probably around 4,000 here at the height of their populations. So if we had sea otters here in Oregon, we don't now, what happened to them? I mean, you guys all touched that pelt, right? If you were cold, there's sometimes when I'm doing events where I wrap this around my shoulders. It is so warm, right? Almost every sea otter around the world was killed in the fur trade in the 17 and 1800s. Fur trade? Yeah, fur trade. What? Oh, sorry. Yeah, in the fur trade. It was Russian, British, and American ships who were hunting sea otters, mostly selling them to China, where they were used as a symbol of royalty and power. And there was intense hunting pressure across the range until about the 19th century when they were hunted so extensively that it was no longer really profitable to hunt them. We don't know much about the fur trade in Oregon. It probably wasn't a prime target. As you know, the Oregon coast has few natural large harbors. Sea otter populations were likely dispersed and harder to hunt, but it was a very lucrative trade. It is estimated that one of these pelts during the fur trade was worth about $15,000. Russians called it brown gold with how much money they were making off of sea otters. So they were scarce by the early 1800s. It's thought that they were eliminated from Oregon entirely by the early 1900s. The last evidence I've been able to find of a native Oregon sea otter is this article published in the Coos Bay Times in 1910, which tells of a man named George Forgy buying an otter pelt off of someone named S.C. Brown from Port Orford for $500. This is the last actual evidence we've seen of a native Oregon sea otter. Even though the hunting pressure in the fur trade was extensive, and it was extensive, 99% of sea otters worldwide were killed in the fur trade. There were some remnant populations that escaped. And you can see that they are in pretty isolated places in Russia, in the Aleutian Islands, in Alaska. Somehow, 50 animals survived in Big Sur, California, which at the time must have been isolated enough from population centers. That is the only reason California still has sea otters, because those things survive there. So take another quick look at this. This is early 1900s sea otters. These populations, though small, did provide the basis for the revival of the species. And look at that. The next one, this is the current range of sea otters today. So they have been, it's a huge conservation success story for us. They have come back. But you'll notice there's about a 900-mile gap on the west coast of the U.S. without sea otters. So between about Santa Cruz and the Olympic Peninsula, there are no native sea otters. So if you wanted to go find sea otters today, where would you find them? Again, California has sea otters. This is the southern subspecies. There are about 3,000 animals in California, covering around 300 miles of coastline from Santa Cruz in the north to Point Conception in the south. That might seem like a lot of animals, but they only are taking about 13% of their historic range right now in California. And they're being limited from spreading both north and south by shark bites. Great white sharks don't feed on sea otters. They're looking for seals and sea lions. They want that blubber, but they do exploratory bites like they do to surfers, which is what terrifies me when I'm out there. And you can imagine that exploratory bite is not a fun thing to happen. What happens is an otter's pelt gets punctured. If they don't die from trauma, they die. There are major concerns about the genetic limitations of this population. Every animal is descended from that original 50 without any genetic input from anything up north. So they are all related together. I grew up in Appalachia, so I kind of understand. Not good. Not good. Not good. I can say that because I grew up there. You can find sea otters in Washington. This is the northern subspecies. They were reintroduced to the Olympic Peninsula in the 1970s. There are about 3,000 animals in Washington today. There are major concerns about what oil spills might do to this population. If anyone remembers the Exxon Valdez spill, all those images of sea otter pelts, sea otters being covered in oil, that means that they can't clean their pelts, they can't stay warm, they die of hypothermia. There is a huge population of sea otters in Alaska. This is also the northern subspecies. They were nearly extinct across the state again, but they were reintroduced in the late 1960s. And they put about 450 sea otters in Southeast Alaska. And that population has grown to almost 30,000. Southeast Alaska is sea otter heaven. It is fjord, and like this map over here, right? It's fjords, it's inlets. It's just amazing habitat for sea otters. And it's been a huge success story in the conservation of the species, but it has led to some conflicts with humans. Who here likes to eat crab? Crab, right? Who likes to eat mussels? Mussels, oysters, clams, all those. So do sea otters. And you can imagine what 30,000 animals eating 30% of their body weight every day to do to certain shellfish that people make money off of, make a living off of, and that people like to enjoy. Interestingly enough, there was a reintroduction effort here in Oregon in the 1970s, happening at the same time as the reintroduction effort in Washington, British Columbia, and Alaska. There were about 50 animals brought to Port Orford and 40 into Coos Bay. There were 11 pups born in Oregon over the course of 10 years, but ultimately that population kind of petered out. We've done a lot of looking into it. Why did the Oregon reintroduction not work? And the first thing is that all of these reintroductions were done because there was atomic bomb testing being done on Anchica Island in the oceans. They needed to get those animals out and put them. So I think earlier I was talking to somebody and I called it a very shoot from the hip cowboy approach. They took animals and they just released them. One of the first things they found is that if we put 100 animals out there right now, immediately half would leave trying to go back to the. So if you put 50 into Port Orford, you're down to 25. It's a very small population for success. They also experienced a lot of harsh weather during their attempts to take them out to where they were going to locate them. They couldn't get them to the holding pens, which they were going to use to acclimate them. They dumped them into open water in harsh conditions. Some sea otters even drowned during this attempt. I don't want to, throw any shade to the people who were doing this. They were doing this the best available knowledge that they had, but we've been working hard to make sure that any reintroduction attempt in Oregon is more informed on science and actual data. And even though we don't have sea otters here in Oregon, we do sometimes see them. They are almost always young males from Washington coming down to Oregon looking for mates unsuccessfully, which is exactly what my dating experience is like. I feel a lot of affinity for these gentlemen. There was one in Newport in 2021, one in Reedsport in 2016, another in Depot Bay in 2009. And last summer, there were two at Ecola. Did I say that right? Ecola State Park. That were young males from Washington that came down. I have a video of it, but for some reason Google Slides won't let me play it, so I'm sorry. It's really cute, but we got a call from someone saying that they saw a sea otter. My coworker took the call and was like, most likely it was a river otter. And this lady's like, no, it was swimming on its back. It had large flippers. My coworker drove from Portland to the state park and spent all day looking and found two young male sea otters there. They hung out for about a month. One disappeared. We don't know where it went. The other washed up with shark bite. Oh. So I'm talking to you guys about this. Like, why do we even care that sea otters aren't here besides the fact that they're really cute? Right? Like, what? Why do we even care? One of the main reasons is that sea otters are a keystone species. And a keystone species is this animal that significantly and disproportionately affects the function of its surrounding environment. So think about beavers, right? What do beavers do? They build dams, right? A dam floods an area, often irritating a lot of people, but it floods an area. That influences what type of plants grow there. That influences what type of animals feed on those plants, what type of animals feed on those animals, right? That one animal making that huge impact. Does everybody know about the wolf reintroduction into Yellowstone National Park? Wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park. They started feeding on elk. The elk no longer felt safe congregating around rivers, so they stopped eating the willows. The willows grew back. Water temperatures cooled. Native fish returned. Songbirds returned. So these keystone species are animals that, through their actions, have a huge impact on every animal and plant and every species that surrounds them. And sea otters were really the animal that exemplified the concept of a keystone species. And it was done through some graduate work by a man named Jim Estes in the 1970s. While diving off of Amchitka Island, which is where that atomic bomb testing was being done, they had a healthy population of sea otters at the time. While diving, what Jim saw would be an example of this picture on the left, right? This beautiful kelp forest, all the fish, mammals, shellfish, and vertebrates that depend on that kelp forest. While diving off of nearby Shemya Island, which did not have sea otters, instead of a kelp forest, you saw that on the right. Does anybody know what we call that? Urchin bearing, yeah. So these purple urchins went in and destroyed all of that kelp because there was no predators to keep their populations in control. So the idea here again is that sea otters, similar to wolves, sea otters, by preying on purple urchins, limit those populations, limit how much they can feed on kelp. Kelp grows, stays healthy, provides all that habitat and food for all the species that use it. And kelp really is an amazing, I say plant, but it's actually an algae. It's really the foundation of our nearshore ecosystem. Complex habitat for a variety of marine life. It's associated with huge amounts of biodiversity. It buffers ocean waves and currents and helps protect our coastline from erosion. It also captures and stores carbon at a high amount and is thought to be instrumental in our fight against climate change. We mostly have bull kelp here in Oregon, which grows annually. There's also giant kelp, which you can find in California, but I know someone's going to know the answer. You two are not allowed to say this. There's one spot on the Oregon coast where you can find both bull kelp and giant kelp. Does anybody know? It's kind of right in our backyard. Nope. Simpson Reef. Yes, Cape area. Simpson Reef is the only spot in Oregon you will find giant. And I've talked to a bunch of people, and no one really knows why, except that maybe it's protected enough because of the reef there. But yeah, it's the only spot in Oregon. I hate including data in presentations. I'm just going to gloss over these and say that there are decades of science that link sea otters to the health of kelp and then the health of all those species that rely on that kelp. So this is a paper about the otters moving slowly through British Columbia. No otters to 20 years with otters, you see increases in kelp and all those invertebrates and fish that use that kelp. Similarly, in the same study, they found that with sea otters, there were about 46 times more rockfish in those areas, just because of kelp that sea otters help protect and conserve. And sea otters have always been thought of as this near-shore ecosystem, but as we've watched them expand and grow, they started to inhabit and permanently reside into estuaries. There's an estuary in California called Elkhorn Slough, which has a permanent population of sea otters. And what they found there is that sea otters, similar to what they do to kelp, are really important for our eelgrass in estuaries. And it's a similar concept. There are small slugs and snails that graze on algae that grows on eelgrass. Without predators like sea otters, crab populations expand. They eat all those slugs and snails, and these eelgrass suffocates. And so sea otters, when they went back into Elkhorn Slough, started eating those crabs, let the algae grazers do their work. And Elkhorn Slough is one of the only estuaries on the West Coast that actually has a thriving and improving system of eelgrass. So, and eelgrass is really the kelp of our estuaries. It's a very important habitat for a lot of biodiversity. It improves water quality, and it has a lot of benefits for migratory waterfowl, salmon, and other fish and estuarine species. So why do we care about all this? We are having some unprecedented problems in our nearshore ecosystem. And here are some headlines that I found about kelp under pressure on the West Coast. My favorite being California's underwater forests are being eaten by the cockroaches of the ocean. And while these are centered on California, California gets all the love, Oregon doesn't. It is happening here in our backyards. This is a picture on the left in 2016 of Orford Reef in Port Orford. You see this murky but beautiful little bull kelp forest. Same spot 2 years later, what you see is urchins starting to devour all of that kelp. And it's easy to villainize purple urchins as cockroaches of the ocean, but they are a native species here. But in a healthy system where there are predators, purple urchins live in cracks and crevices to hide from predators, and they eat bits of kelp that drift to them. Without predators, their populations explode, and they move in and they just mow down kelp forests. And it's not like they just go to kelp, eat it, and then move somewhere else. They can exist for up to 10 years eating their own insides. They call them zombie urchins. So you'll go to these areas where there's no kelp, and there are thousands and thousands of purple zombie urchins. And ODFW just did a dive survey in Orford Reef, and they're estimating that there are 350 million purple urchins. That's one reef in Oregon. So it's a huge, huge problem. And in general, we are facing a lot of pressures with our nearshore ecosystem. We have warming waters. Is everybody familiar with the blob? The 2014 marine heating event? That led to a huge sea star wasting disease, which killed nearly every sunflower sea star across the West Coast. Sunflower sea stars, like sea otters, are also a key predator of sea urchins. So without sea stars, without sunflower sea stars or sea otters, exploded in number and have been multiplying ever since. So that was all kind of doom and gloom, right? Working in conservation can be kind of sad and it can be hard sometimes, but I want to kind of now shift focus and just talk about some of the work that we are doing at the Elakha Alliance to help bring sea otters back to our state. So we get the question, why sea otters? Why now? And the big message we have is that not only are sea otters a native species and deserve to be here, but they are a keystone species. They have that huge effect on their ecosystem relative to their abundance. There are decades of science that shows that they have foundational effects on kelp ecosystems because they're key predators of urchins. And without them, purple urchin populations have exploded, and we're dealing with that issue right now. We were started by a Siletz tribal member named David Hatch. He had built a boat with his son, Peter. He was looking for a name for that boat. He found the word Elakha in a Chinook language dictionary that really sparked Dave's interest in what happened to sea otters. Does their absence matter? What could be done to bring them back? And Dave met with a lot of people to talk about this issue. Unfortunately, he passed away in 2016. The people he had met and talked with came together to make his vision of the Elakha Alliance a reality. We are currently led by a 15-person board of directors, a lot of people on the coast. Jan Hodder, who is going to be presenting soon, is one of our board members. And they bring years of policy, legal, and scientific expertise to the work we do. We also have an advisory council made up of a lot of coastal conservation groups to help guide some of the work that we do, especially in the scientific realm. And our mission as an organization is to restore a healthy population of sea otters to the Oregon coast, and in the process, help make our marine ecosystem more robust and more resilient. And we include that broader ecosystem restoration theme because while we think sea otters are a key piece of conserving and restoring our nearshore environment, they're not a silver bullet. Do you guys know the Oregon Kelp Alliance, ORCA? They're based out of Port Orford. They're working a lot on paying divers to go down and hammer urchins in special spots to just kill them manually. They're doing a lot of work on sunflower sea star recovery. So there are a lot of groups who are looking at this purple urchin barren kelp loss issue and coming at it from different angles. Our two main objectives in the work we do is to complete the scientific assessment and policy analysis just to determine is it feasible to bring sea otters back to Oregon. And a lot of the work that I do is the other objective, is building regional consensus that this is an idea worth pursuing. And I think only if we are successful in those two objectives would we actually proceed with restoration in carefully chosen sites, either with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service or one of Oregon's coastal tribes. Some of the work that we have done, we have published a feasibility study. You can find that on our website for free. I have a master's degree in science. it put me to sleep. It didn't. It is bad. But we have the abridged version, so you can just get the highlight. We've done various economic and GIS assessments, especially looking at habitat, and where would be the best habitat for a reintroduction effort. We helped amend the Oregon Nearshore Conservation Strategy, which is now called the State Wildlife Action Plan. And I'm happy to say that through pressure from our group and some of our followers and constituents, that ODFW now recognizes sea otters as a species of greatest conservation, which we hope will make sure that ODFW has more skin in the game for any kind of reintroduction effort. We've also published a study on the impacts to travel and tourism that sea otters might have. I went to Alaska and went on a sea otter tour, got a beer after, I ate dinner after, stayed in a hotel, right? Like wildlife viewing brings a lot of money into coastal economies. And this study found that sea otter reintroduction in Oregon could bring up to $4 million per year into coastal economies, which isn't a lot, but with our coastal cities and communities struggling with the transition from logging or fishing into a more tourism economy, it could help. So what's the bottom line from some of the work that we've done? We found that reintroductions are a successful conservation tool. 55% of sea otters alive today are here because there was a reintroduction. We found that sea otters being reintroduced to Oregon is likely to succeed with some appropriate considerations, and those are really social and economic. There is habitat here. We are pretty certain of that. But the bigger issues are, what does that do to certain economies, and what are the social attitudes toward the reintroduction? And part of that is that we think the otters returning to Oregon will have many direct effects. It'll help kelp ecosystems, it'll help eelgrass ecosystems, but there will also be a lot of indirect effects that we don't really know about. And we also found that estuaries, such as Coos Bay estuary, might be a really important consideration for reintroducing the population. So I'm just going to just go quickly into some of the things that we're still kind of like piecing out. There are the regulatory protections of sea otters. So every sea otter is protected by the Marine Mammal Protection. But sea otters in California, the southern subspecies, are also on the endangered species list. There is the habitat suitability and site selection. We've done a lot of modeling that shows that there's certain spots on the south coast and even near Yaquina Bay that have great habitat, but there's been no site selected yet. The source animals, will we get animals from Alaska, which have a bunch of sea otters, and they could probably stand to lose a few hundred, or we take them from California, where there's not as many, but those animals need more conservation and more reintroduction efforts for their success. Historically, Oregon had both the northern subspecies and the southern subspecies, so we're still working that source population. There's the health, behavior, and welfare of any animal that's being captured from the wild, put into holding tanks, loaned to Coos Bay or Yaquina Bay, and then stored in holding tanks there, brought out to sites. And I told you guys what happened in the 1970s reintroduction effort here. We're not trying to redo that. There's the management capacity and support facilities. The amount of manpower and money it will take to bring 125 animals from another part of the country to this part of the coast is huge. And then there's also stakeholder concerns and perspectives. I do a lot of work with the crab industry, trying to hear their thoughts, their concerns. The Dungeness crab industry is the highest economic driver on the coast, and there are a lot of fishermen who are concerned that the sea otter reintroduction might impact their catch. Just some of the next steps that we're working on. We're collaborating on a regional scale with California. Northern California does not have sea otters either, so we're trying to make sure that any reintroduction includes that. We do a lot of outreach and community engagement, constantly trying to fill science and socioeconomic gaps and policy gaps. Increased tribal engagement. We work a lot with the Select. One of the big news, I think some of you guys have heard about it, is that the Sweats were awarded a $1.5 million America the Beautiful grant, which is going to help them build capacity to take the lead in a reintroduction planning. With the federal funding freeze, we were very unsure if that money was going to come through, but it has come through. And the Sweats are starting to work on organizing Oregon and Northern California's coastal tribes to actually lead a planning effort, which we think is huge because right now, under the current administration, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which has legal authority over sea otters, is not making any moves for reintroduction. But there is precedent that U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service could delegate that to a sovereign tribe. And so the Sweats are really interested in kind of building their capacity and working to take the lead and maybe even apply for a permit to do the range structures. We think would be a huge event. We, as the Elakha Alliance, we don't want to be the lead on range introduction. We want to support our partners, and if the selects are interested, we're all on board with them. Just quickly, our website's great. It is not only full of really cute sea otter photos, it has so much information, all of it free. I have our newsletter sign up sheet back there along with some stickers that people can take. It's great. My coworker puts it together once a month. It's just updates about the work that we're doing and just marine issues in general. And we do a lot of events. My coworker puts on the Oregon Otter Beer Festival in Portland every year, which 15 breweries brew an otter themed beer to compete to see who's best. It's a lot of fun, a lot of beer. This year there's wine too, I think. And I'm trying to organize more events on the South Coast. Last summer, we partnered with Alana Kiefer at Shifting Tides and did Eat Like an Otter event, where she took a group of people out to Face Rock to forage for things that sea otters would eat. And we went back to the Port of Bend, and her brother made just delicious food with it. We'll be doing another one this summer. I'm not sure the date yet, but I will try to make sure that everybody here knows about that. We do a lot of webinars, presentations. So if you guys have any friends or groups that you'd like to have someone speak at, please contact me. And lastly, an alliance isn't an alliance without partners, and so we're grateful for all the partners that help us do the work that we do. And with that, I can take any questions. Yes.
I thought sea urchins were edible.
They are, yeah.
So instead of killing them, why aren't they brought up and sold as food?
Very interesting question. So when you go to a sushi restaurant and you get uni, which is like the gonadal content of the sea urchin, you're eating red urchin. They grow a lot bigger natural. Purple urchins are the ones that have really exploded in number. There's a commercial harvest for red urchins in Oregon. It's small. There's like 12 permit holders. So when you're eating uni, you're not eating purple sea urchin gonads. You're eating red sea urchin gonads. Yeah. I kind of like uni, but I had to get over that fact. There is a group, including the Port of Bandon, who are paying divers to go out and collect purple sea urchins, and they're holding them in tanks and feeding them both seaweed and apparently cabbage works really well too, and trying to grow them into a merchantable size to make a market for it. So there are two groups who are trying to do that. Yeah. You can go down to the Port of Bandon if you know Jeff Griffin. You probably crack one open and try.
So the purple ones are edible.
Yes.
They're just not big enough.
They're not big enough, and I guess when they're not big enough, the uni is not like sushi grade or desirable.
But they can be cooked, can't they? Or...
I think eat it raw.
Oh,
yeah, I went out with OINB and we did some dredging with one of their classes just to see what was on the bottom for sea otters to eat, and we found a purple urchin and we cracked it and ate it, and it was all right.
What are the most likely sites?
I'll say this with the caveat that no decision has been made. The best sites ecologically are probably Cape Arago, Coos Bay Estuary combination. Port Orford historically has been thought of as the best site because Orford Reef had one of the densest kelp forests in Oregon. That kelp has been pretty decimated. The Yaquina Head area also has great habitat. And when you think about, this isn't just an ecological question, right? Like I talked about the management facilities. Yaquina Bay also has a headquarters for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It has the aquarium. The aquarium is redoing their marine mammal center to actually include tanks for sea otter reintroduction. So they're kind of like all in on this. So mostly ecologically, it's South Coast. When you think about it from like a management capacity, you can include Yaquina Bay as well.
Where is it? That bay.
Newport, yeah.
How compatible are the southern and northern subspecies? Do they agree?
Yeah. The southern sea otters are a little bit smaller, but yeah, they interbreed.
Is it known whether the sea otters in the Hillgrass estuary will predate European green crabs?
Yes, actually, you asked, will sea otters eat European green crab?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. There's a recent paper published that sea otters and elkhorn stew are demolishing European green crab. Yeah, they're not picky. If it's there and they can eat it, they're gonna eat it.
Also about the purple urchin, through a presentation from Orca, I learned that the zombie urchins actually have no meat.
Mhm.
Like they will consume their own gonads to stay alive when they eat all the Kelp. So that's the other reason why they can. Because of the-
And what's interesting is like when we think about like sea otters and sunflower sea stars, right? There's something about redundancy in the system, right? If you have two predators, if one goes away, you still have another predator, which is why purple urchins weren't really a huge problem until there was sea star wasting. So sea otters, because they're kind of prima donnas, they want a lot of gonadal content. So they're not really going after zombie urchins. But Orca has shown in some studies that purple sea urchins, and not purple sea urchins, that sunflower sea stars will actually eat zombie urchins. So we think those two combined could really be a big plus for our kelp system.
What did you learn from the introduction in the 70s that didn't succeed about family units of the model?
Yeah, and that's so now the most recent reintroduction was in San Nicolas Island in California. And they actually captured family units because they are very social animals. I think that it's hard with wild caught animals, right? Like I said, half of them leave, and there was no monitoring done on almost any of these populations. I think in Coos Bay, there was a grad student with a spotting scope who went out for like a year or two. So we don't really know, like, did they capture family units and bring them down? Probably not. I think they set up nets and just like captured random sea otters. But with that, a lot of people ask, well, why did Washington, which is very simple, why did that population succeed with similar numbers, whereas the Oregon one didn't? And one of the hypotheses is that when Oregon sea otters left Oregon to try to go back, they actually ran into the population in Washington and helped supplement that population. Because for a while, the Washington population was on the verge of collapse. And so there is that idea of like maybe Oregon sea otters help conserve that. There's the hardest part about trying to learn about the 1970s reintroduction is that there was just not a lot of information about how they captured, and there was no monitoring done for the populations. So we don't really know how important family units would be.
But going forward, you will figure out how to.
Yeah, and the San Nicolas Island. So what they did is it's an amazing video. They use scuba divers with rebreathers, so you don't like send bubbles up, and they swim underneath the otters with these net guns, and they shoot them from the bottom. And that's how they capture them. So you can be way more selective on like what otters get. So I know that there is a team right now working on like the ethics and the capture strategies, and that they're considering like what a family unit might need for an actual successful reconstruction.
So how successful have you been with talking to people that have a stake
Yeah.
in the reintroduction of sea otters, like people that are harvesting crabs, about addressing their concerns, and do they seem to be understanding that it would be helpful, or are they still really not thinking it's a good idea?
It's hard. You know, I think it's easy to try to paint the industry with one voice. There are a couple of people I know who I will never think, right? Like, we have a good working relationship. I could show them science, data till I'm blue in the face, and they want. It's very personal. The majority of the fleet that I know have the stance of, I'm not sure, right? Like most of those guys and women are like, they're fishing for crab heavy in winter, and then they're switching to rockfish and stuff, right? So there are, they will see benefits from, I think, a sea otter reintroduction. What I like to, most of my work with the crab industry is less me trying to like convince or sway, and more just me like being someone who like a conduit to get them involved in the conversation. I call it therapy. It's a hard job. It's a lot of drinking beer with crab. on the Elakha tattoo. It's a hard job, but it's just a lot of just relationship building. They have not come out as an industry with the stance, and I think the best we could get them to do is to not actively oppose. I don't know. It's a hard one. I don't think they will see many impacts. I mean, they're all concerned about what happened in Southeast Alaska, where there are 30,000 sea otters. Oregon will never have that. Our continental shelf dives off really quickly, and most of the fleet, especially out of Newport, are putting pots at depths that sea otters can't physically dive to. In Port Orford, there are a couple of guys I know who fish pretty close to shore, and I think some of those smaller boat fisheries might see some impacts, and some of them are concerned, like, well, what happens if the sea otter gets into my crab pond and drowns? And like, I don't have an answer for that. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has a very like lukewarm answer about that. And so, there's a lot to consider. And the crab industry is also, they're dealing with whale entanglement closures, right? They're dealing with domoic acid. They feel like they're the way this one guy put it, like death from 1,000 cuts. So if they can't fish over here because of whale entanglement, they can't fish over here because of domoic acid content, they can't fish here because they're sea otters, they're feeling squeezed. Yeah, it's hard. I don't think there'll be huge impacts, but I also don't make a living and support a family doing that. So it's an ongoing conversation.
And everyone else may know this, I apologize. I'm from the Midwest and the otters I'm familiar with are Big River otters of some kind. They're gonna create a home. When they're in the ocean like this and you say they're social, are they creating some type of shelter or home that they return to after fishing, or are they going up and down the coast altogether?
They are looking for sheltered spots along like reefs or in kelp forests. Sea otters rarely go on land. Okay. There's a spot in California where they will haul out for a little bit, and they are so awkward. They don't have the hip bones to actually walk.
So you were saying maybe Port Orford, but that means they will be going up and down.
Yeah, and they'll look for, and it's all about population density too, right? If you don't have otters in one area, they're going to stay in one area and feed there. As that population grows, they're going to spread and then spread and spread and spread. But mostly
for any kind of shelter or building.
No building. It would just be like looking for, especially during storms, like reefs and probably estuaries to stay protected.
Aside from hitting a few purple urchins with hammers, are there any other biological controls that we implement?
Besides predator reintroduction, and I think there's predator reintroduction, there's paying divers go and hammer them, and then there's people going out and collecting them and trying to grow them in commercial size. Beyond that, I don't know of much work going on beyond that.
Okay. I just was wondering if you have a estimate of a price tag of translocating 125 sea otters to here.
Yeah, so we did our feasibility study, which was just focused just on Oregon. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service did their own feasibility study, which included Northern California. And they estimated that for a reintroduction in Oregon and a reintroduction in California, it'd be $35 million. And that was like 5 years ago. And so it's one of those things where historically it has always been thought of as U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service doing this. One, because they have legal authority, and two, because it would probably take like some kind of like law passage of funding to get the money for it. There is a group that just started out of the Bay Area called the Wildlife Conservation Network. Well, they didn't just start, but they're a privately funded group of people who've made a lot of money in tech who want to put money into conservation. And so they have funds for animals in Africa and South America. And they recently just started a sea otter fund and are trying to raise 40 million over the next 10 years. So we're looking at that as, okay, if there is this large amount of private money and there is a coastal tribe that is willing to lead this, like maybe we can not go around U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but come up with a solution that can fund and implement it without having to go through all of that jurisdiction. Yeah, probably more than 40 million at this point.
What was the name of that organization again?
The Wildlife Conservation Network.
Okay.
When you say Bay Area, are you talking about Oregon or California?
Well, that question. I was just down in California's Bay Area, and I kept calling my parents, I'm like, Oregon's Bay Area. Yeah, it's from the California Bay. It's a lot of, I shouldn't say this live on Zoom. I call it blood money. No, it's a lot of tech money. It's just a lot of people who've made a lot of money and are now trying to do good work with it. So yeah, they're getting funded.
Just a question about when this might actually begin happening. Those of us in the room who are more advanced in age in
our
lifetime.
It's hard because it all depends on when there's the actual like term, right? So once a decision is made to reintroduce sea otters, and then there is a permit associated with that, that kicks into a process called the NEPA process, National Environmental Protection Act, I think. And that includes a socioeconomic survey, that includes a bunch of habitat surveys, a bunch of like social surveys. They estimate that takes about like 3 to 4 years. So from a decision, you're looking at 3 to 4 years. Right now, I mean, best case scenario, like 5 to 6.
Where we actually see sea otters being brought.
Yeah, best case scenario.
Wow.
And we have made a lot of progress and a lot of what we're doing now, especially with this grant for the Sweat Tribe, is all those things that the NEPA process needs, like the economic survey and socioeconomic analysis. We're trying to do that now. So that way, when the decision is made, it's like, okay, here's this information, here's this information, here's this information. Let's get it going. But it's still going to take a tribe applying for a permit or the federal government making a decision for it to actually kick off into that.
Is there a way to, sorry, if they did move them, tag them when we
Yeah.
monitor?
It's hard because they clean their fur so
Yeah.
much, but what they do in California is they get their rear flipper and they put a color tag
Gotcha.
in one and a different color tag in another, and then they have the animal associated with the color code. So when I was down there doing the population survey, I was like, female otter, red, green. She's like, oh, that's Cynthia, you know. And so they have them like that is the only way that they've been tagging them.
Have they learned how to take those tags off?
Not yet.
So my question, and because I'm not a scientist, I don't use proper terminology, but I read because I want to learn. What I've read is without the sea otters eating the urchins off the kelp, there is something that grows on the kelp that falls to the ground, which creates I'm gonna call it an ecosystem where whatever gray whales eat grows in that.
I know that gray whales eat a lot of like small fish and krill that are in kelp systems. I'm not sure, but I know that maybe you're referring to is called a drift kelp, where like bits of kelp will break off and they'll drift to other parts, and then that's historically how urchins fed on kelp. I don't know about gray whales with that, but I know that most whale species do feed off of things that grow in the kelp.
Hi, thank you so much. This is fantastic. And I'm thinking in my head, our organization, we talk to the public.
Yeah.
Sadly, we don't serve beer. Okay, one, like two. Let people know about your website.
Yeah.
Because you can donate there.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
From a standpoint of talking points, you gave us a lot.
Mhm.
And I know it depends on the audience. Like, are we just talking to a tourist who's driving the coast, or are we talking to someone that might be a fisherman? So what would you say are some of your top 2 or 3 talking points
Yeah.
that you have found most effective?
Love that question. And the reason I wanted to do this presentation is because I think if there were a reintroduction effort, your group is going to be like on the front lines talking about it. But even before that, like I would love to, and maybe even outside of this, would love to like sit down with any of your volunteers who want to like learn a little bit more. I would say that there are sea otters are a native species that have huge impacts on our nearshore ecosystem and aren't here because of the fur trade as one. I'd say that there is work being done to reintroduce a population to sea otter, to reintroduce a population of sea otters, and that work has shown that it is like ecologically feasible. I think the biggest thing, if someone asks like what they can do and what you all can do if you want to, is like talk or write to your local officials, your state senators, your U.S. and federal senators, all of those. Like, people in power need to hear that people actually support this. Yeah, I'm happy to like, especially if people are going out to like Simpson Reef and want just like a little talking list, or I mean any of the spots you guys go to, I'd be happy to provide something or work with.
Be in touch.
Yeah.
You said the San Nicolas project, is that the most recent reintroduction?
Yeah.
What's the stage of it now and have they done any monitoring or?
Yeah, there's been a lot of monitoring. That population, they saw the initial decline.
Yeah.
But they put enough sea otters there that they were able to kind of recover, and now there's like a healthy population of sea otters. I'm not sure how many are there. But yeah, that population has recovered and is growing.
What was the initial reintroduction? How many?
I think it was 125 and stuff.
And how old is it?
I don't know when. I think it was done in the 90s, like late 90s.
Okay.
And they're like, again, a very slow breeding species. There's this new model that's was kind of finished that is trying to take all the habitat data, all the decades of sea otter population data, to look at like what would a reintroduction look like in the future.
Yeah.
And we've done some for like Coos Bay, that if you put 125 animals into Coos Bay at like 30 years post reintroduction, you're only at like 320 animals on average. So it usually takes a while for those populations to fully kind of get going. You'll see the graph is like an initial decline, establishment phase, and then they grow, and San Nicolas one did this.
I believe you said there was about a $4 million positive impact, economic impact. What do you, is that?
So they looked at areas in California and Alaska where people pay to go see sea. And then they use data about like what people, it's actually kind of creepy because they have like this phone data that like I guess phone companies sell, so they can track like how much time are you spending in like Coos Bay, Port Orford.
Yeah.
And then they did a survey on like how much would people, they said like, oh, sea otters are reintroduced to Oregon. How much would you pay to go see them? So they calculated all this and said that like it would bring $4 million into the Oregon Coast. The big caveat was that like, does anybody here know of a tour company on the South Coast? I know one, Dave Lacey down in Port Orford, right? Like to capitalize on that 4 million, the South Coast would need to develop infrastructure around that to grow cap. So that was like the big caveat is it could, but where they're reintroduced, you really need to build that capacity to